Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to use augmented 6th chords in minor keys. So the augmented 6th chord is part of that family of chromatic chords. In other words, chords that sometimes use accidentals that don't really belong to the key, but nevertheless add a bit of colour, a little bit of drama to the musical landscape and just make life a little bit less predictable. But we need to work out how to form them and then how to use them. So first of all, let's be sure about how we go about forming an augmented 6th chord in a minor key. Okay, well, here's my recipe for doing this. You'll find this described in various ways in textbooks, but for me, this is a recipe I've arrived at over the years that I think just makes it easy, and you can apply it to any key. So if you want to find an augmented 6th chord in a minor key, have a go at this. We're in the key of C minor for our purposes today. Find the 6th degree of the scale. Now in C minor, thinking about the harmonic minor scale because we're dealing with harmony. In the harmonic minor scale, the 6th degree is A flat. So use A flat as your starting point. Now, when you've got that A flat, find the augmented 6 above it. So an augmented 6 above A flat is F sharp, okay? And then once you've got A flat and F sharp, put the tonic in the middle. So there's C, because we're in C minor. So we've now got A flat at the bottom, the 6th degree. We've got F sharp at the top, which is an augmented 6 above that A flat. And we've put the tonic in the middle, the C. That's the generic augmented 6th chord. Now, as it stands with just those 3 notes, it's basically an Italian 6. I can double up the C, maybe in a different octave, just to confirm that Italian nature of it. But those 3 notes give us the Italian 6. If to that basic generic augmented 6th chord, I add an augmented 4th above the bottom note, I will then have a French 6. So the bottom note's A flat, an augmented 4th above A flat is D. So if I put D on top of that chord, it's now a French 6. So what have I got? I've got A flat at the bottom, the 6th degree, F sharp at the top, the augmented 6 above it. I've put the tonic in the middle, and now I've got D, an augmented 4th above the A flat. That's a French 6. Okay, now if I want to have a German 6 instead of a French 6, instead of that D, I can have an E flat, and the E flat is a perfect 5th above the bottom note. So A flat at the bottom, F sharp at the top, C in the middle, and now E flat, because it's a perfect 5th above the A flat at the bottom. So generic chord and Italian, add the augmented 4th, French, or add the perfect 5th, German. So the Italian, French and German 6. So that's how we form the chord, and that recipe will work in any other minor key as well. So now we need to think about how to use the things. In other words, what are the most likely approach chords and what are the most likely chords of resolution? Let's deal with the resolution first. When you have an augmented 6th chord, it's often known as a predominant chord. So I can have one of these augmented 6, here's an Italian, and I can follow it with the dominant chord, chord 5. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I can also interrupt that resolution by having the augmented 6th chord and then having chord 1 in 2nd inversion before moving on to the chord 5. So, okay, here's a German 6 this time, followed by chord 1 in 2nd inversion and then chord 5. So I can go straight to 5, or I can go 1 2nd inversion, 5. You can choose whichever you fancy. but you can use both of those. They're the most common resolutions. There are other things that you could do, but at the moment I'm talking about the most common resolutions, the things that work best. Okay, now we're going to think about approach chords, and we're going to consider the different degrees of the scale and the diatonic chords that are built on them, and work out which ones are good approach chords and maybe which ones don't work quite so well. So in the first example, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm approaching with chord 1. Chord 1 in root position, followed in this case by a German 6, and then I'm using 1 in second inversion, followed by 5. So here's 1, German 6, 1 in second inversion, 5. Sounds pretty good. So that's a nice smooth operation, isn't it? Now, why does it work particularly smoothly? Well, you can see that we have certain common notes. So C in chord 1 also is present, that C, in the German 6 or any of the augmented 6. So if you can use that common note in the same part, that's a good move. You'll also notice that E flat is a common note. So by doing this in the tenor, I'm repeating the E flat. So repeating common notes can really help smooth that progression from one chord to the next. You can also see in the same two parts, the C is common to the German 6 and to the chord 1 in second inversion that follows, as is the E flat. So you can see what I've tried to do here is 3 C's in the soprano, 3 E flats in the tenor, and then they both resolve by step. So it's nice sort of plain movement. The alto, well, that's pretty solid. It comes down a half step or a semitone, comes back up again. Leap in the bass, because we can't really avoid that, going from the tonic to the 6, but having had a big leap, trying to step back inside the leap to mitigate it a bit. So that's why the part writing works quite well if you organize it in that kind of way. You could lay out the parts differently, switch the parts around, all sorts of things you can do, but looking for those common notes is quite useful, and it works particularly well using chord 1 as an approach chord. So here it is again. Okay, so that's using chord 1. Let's now move on to example 2, and I'm going to use chord 2 here. And what you might notice is that I'm not using 2 in root position, I'm using 2 in first inversion. There's a reason for that, and the main reason is that when you have a diminished chord, as 2 is in a harmonic minor scale, it will always sound a bit ugly in root position, because you kind of really make the most of this exposure of the tritone between the bottom and the top of the triad. Put it in first inversion, you really mitigate that. So you see, that sounds so much better. Root position, a little bit ugly. First inversion, oh, sounds much nicer, doesn't it? So I'm going to use a chord 2 in first inversion, then I'm using an Italian 6, and this time I'm going straight to chord 5. Just to show you that you can use the 1 in second inversion before the 5 or go straight to the 5. There we go. One thing you find is if you go from a German 6 straight to a 5, it's very easy to write consecutive fifths. It really does happen that you get consecutive fifths between a pair of parts. So when you're using a German 6, as we were in the first example, it's often better to have that 1 in second inversion before the 5. Not so much of a problem when you're using Italian or French 6. Anyway, so there's example number 2, chord 2 in first inversion, Italian, and then going on to chord 5. So that works quite nicely, doesn't it? And you've noticed that I've got a nice kind of smooth progression in the soprano part, just coming down by step. Slightly funny interval in the alto, A flat to F sharp, but coming back to the note in between to mitigate it. Bit more of a leap in the tenor, but again, stepping back inside the leap to mitigate it. The bass line's not really leaping very far, but I've still managed to step back inside it. So again, the part writing is all part of the success here, or not. So there's the approach from 2B, works quite well, doesn't it? Okay, chord 3 is a bit troublesome in minor keys, because in the harmonic minor scale, chord 3 is an augmented chord. So going from an augmented chord to an augmented 6th, it's not impossible, but it's not really the kind of easiest progression, is it? So I'm going to suggest that, particularly in a minor key, chord 3 is probably the least successful approach chord. Okay, have a look at example 3, and you'll see I'm using chord 4. Again, I'm using chord 4 in first inversion. Why am I doing that? Well, I could use it in root position, no particular problem about that in itself, but if I used it in root position, I'd have an F in the bass here. An F natural in the bass here would be followed by F sharp in the soprano there. So it's the same note, but then on the next chord it's coming in a different octave, in a different part, with a different accidental. And that means we have false relations. So if we can avoid false relations, it's probably better. You can hear if I go F natural on the bass, then F sharp in the soprano. It's a bit of a jarring on the ear, isn't it? So by putting the chord in first inversion, by having an A flat in the bass there, I can mitigate that and get rid of the false relations. You see, it's not considered a false relation if I do it in the same part. The soprano going F natural, moving up a semitone to F sharp, that's not false relations. But if I had it in the bass, for example, on the first chord, it would be. So that's a reason when you're going from chord 4 as your approach chord to think, would it be better to use 4 in first inversion? So here it is, 4 in first inversion, Italian, chord 5. Sounds quite good. And again, of course, I've got C's as common notes, so I'm trying to repeat those in the same parts. Okay, example number 4, we are using chord 5 as an approach. Of course, chord 5 is the strongest diatonic chord after chord 1, so that's always one that you're going to consider using. And in this case, I'm using a German 6, and I'm going 1 in second inversion to 5 as the resolution of it. So how does that sound? It's pretty good, isn't it? There's a sort of symmetry about starting on 5 and finishing on 5. In certain situations that might make your progression feel a bit stuck. It's like we started here, we ended in the same place. But in the context, it might work really well. And sometimes there's a real need for that kind of symmetry. And the part writing flows very nicely. Do you see? Stepwise in the soprano, alto part, just kind of repetitions and steps going on there. Steps in the tenor, repetitions as well. And the steps going on the bass. So all the parts going very smoothly. Okay. In example 5, I'm considering chord 6 as an approach chord. So here we've got chord 6. Now, how does that work? Because when you look at it, chord 6 going on in this case to a German 6 works really well, doesn't it? Because can you see I've got A flat, C and E flat in chord 6. Now, the same 3 notes appear in the German 6. All I've got to do is add another note. So if you go from chord 6 to a German 6, that works particularly well because 3 notes are in common. A flat's in common, C's in common, E flat's in common. Again, try to write them in the same parts, and then you have the common note situation. Slightly funny interval between A flat and F sharp in the soprano, but not such a big deal in the context. And then a nice chromatic resolution there. So how does that sound from 6? It's a good one, isn't it? Because you can feel 6 kind of evolving by just 1 note changing and 3 notes staying the same, particularly when it goes on to the German, as I say. So there we are. And in example 6, we are considering an approach from chord 7. Now, like chord 2, it's a diminished chord. So for the same reasons as we discussed earlier, best not to use in root position, but to use in first inversion. So here I am using chord 7B, 7 in first inversion, in this case following it with an Italian 6. And going straight on to 5. So You may think, gosh, that's an unusual thing to do, to start from 7 in first inversion, then throw an augmented 6th chord. Doesn't sound too bad. We sometimes talk about 7 as a possible trade with 5. So while we said earlier on, starting 5, finishing 5 has a kind of symmetry that's quite nice. If you didn't quite want that symmetry, but you wanted something that was going to kind of glue 7 to 5, well, it's quite handy, isn't it, that you've got D and B in common, the two notes that are in 7 and in 5. So that's why this one works in its own way, to go from 7B to the augmented 6 back to the 5, that the 7 and the 5 have something in common, yet you feel as if you've heard two different chords. So, as I say, there are many other possibilities. You can elaborate all this within essential notes. You can do more dramatic things with it. But this is just to kind of take you through what's the best way to form the chord, what's the best way to resolve it, what's the best way to approach it, and you'll probably have your own favourites from that list. So I hope that's been helpful. And if you've enjoyed this, well, go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk, where you'll find all sorts of other exciting things, blogs to read, all our online courses covering topics like the one we've just done in lots more detail, doing it theoretically in our advanced theory course alongside all the other chromatic chords, also doing it practically through the keyboard harmony course, or doing it orally through the oral dictation course. Lots of different courses, so have a look and see what suits you. And while you're on the home page, just click on the link to Maestros, because Maestros is our global community of musicians, and they're a wonderful crowd of people, great to get to know. And becoming a maestro comes with all sorts of perks, discounts on the online courses, one of those perks. Other things as well, the opportunity particularly to meet once a month for our live streams, where I offer about an hour of teaching content, and then we have another session where we're looking at your compositions, harmony exercises, arrangements, recorded performances, anything that you want to submit for one-to-one feedback on that, which obviously is shared with the group. And so that's a great kind of mutual learning experience and a great way to share, ask all your musical questions. That's all part of what Maestros is for. So plenty to look at that you might find useful there.